Okay, so we're going to play around with classification, which can be kind of tricky. I hope you watched the classification video before, but we're going to open up our properties and kind of look at some of the different methods. And so layer properties comes up. We're classifying population density in different classes. I just want to show you what it's got so far. If I go to the histogram here and load the values. A histogram is just it's a way of kind of looking at the data that lets us see the number of total records, meaning counties, and this is kind of the value or the variable that we're classifying. So in this case, almost all the counties are way down here. They have a very low population density, and that's why, I don't know if you can see, but most of them are all in this first class, and that's why the map looks all kind of pale, that pale tan color. And then this next section here is kind of the next class, and then that shows us, right around San Francisco and LA and kind of the eastern seaboard, and so on. It kind of goes up, and there's probably I think there's only one county, which might even be the island of Manhattan, that is in this classification. It's just so far off the charts that it's kind of hard to see the rest of the data because it's such an outlier. It's way out here. And so the different classification schemes chop up this data in different ways. So I want to show you the different types of classification methods, but I also want to show you that you can change this histogram. A histogram, of course, is just the bar chart, and like I said before, it's the number of counties, and then the density or whatever variable you're mapping is on the bottom, on the x-axis. But if I change this number of bins, it'll let me see this kind of variation down here a little better. So let's try 100, and that kind of makes them, slightly less number of kind of columns or bins, so that I can kind of see it a little better. And now I think you'll notice if I go back here to classes, and I change it from natural breaks to equal interval, which is the default, and then I go back to, it's just classified, back to my histogram. So now it tries to take the maximum value and the minimum value and divide it equally. So there's 5 equal classes in terms of just raw numerical kind of amounts. But if I do that and hit apply, every single one except for probably Manhattan and a couple other major cities is going to be the same, because this outlier, whatever it is way up here, is really skewing. I guess it is 68,000 people per square. Oh my goodness, that's crazy. That maximum value is just skewing our classification right up. Conversely, so this is kind of underrepresenting the variation that we have. We don't get to see the difference between, for instance, the Great Plains counties and some of these, less dense but still sparse kind of New England counties or things like that. We could go and say, well, let's try a quantile, right? And the quantile, instead of making equal intervals, it decides that it wants to put an equal number of counties in each class. So now you can't really see them, but the actual classifications are so close to each other now because the values, let's see if we can get a little closer here, kind of hard to see, but it's put the same number of counties in each class. And if we hit apply to that, it kind of, overrepresents some areas. You definitely see the variation, and that's kind of cool. And maybe you want to show kind of all this variation. It really shows the difference between, for instance, the Great Plains and the kind of the eastern megalopolis here, and just a lot of the very dense areas throughout the country. But I kind of want something in between. So after I play around with looking at quantile, natural breaks, equal interval, I usually do a manual classification. And I think what I'd like to do for this case is I'd like to break it up manually. So to do that, I'm actually going to add another class too, because I want to show, certain places that are like Chicago and kind of the New York area. I want to bring those out and highlight them because they are the extreme of the data set. So to do that, I'm going to add a couple more classes. You can hit classify, and you can even hit apply if you want to just see what that does anyway. It makes it a little bit more interesting. But I think I want to go from 0 to 50 people per square mile. And I'm just choosing these based on, I've done this before, and I've kind of done a little bit of research. And the spread of the data is roughly geometric, which means it kind of, it's not an exponent, but it's an increasing or a decreasing curve. It's a right skewed kind of geometric spread to the data. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of keep this geometric classification scheme. So I say 1,000. You see I'm kind of roughly doubling it each time. And here I'm going to say 2,500. And I'm doing this because I think if I was to make a legend, I'd want it to be such that people could pretty easily understand the logic to my classification. The default kind of values that come in when you pick one of these are very confusing, and they're kind of I don't know, they're just rough on the eyes. They seem arbitrary to people who aren't map makers. So even though we know quantile means equal number of classes, equal number of records in each class, the class break values are so random in particular that to the novice or to somebody who's not used to looking at maps, it would look very confusing. So I like to pick clean values, and if you can, you should support it with with evidence and with a reason. So, for instance, 500 is, or used to be, a U.S. Census line for 500 people per square mile was the kind of definition between under that was rural and over that was urban. So let's hit apply and see what happens. And that's looking pretty good to me. I'm pretty happy with that. Anything over 1,000 that's surrounded by things other than 1,000 has a metropolitan kind of definition by census standards as well. There's different things like that we can use, and we should use those in our maps if you're making a paper or something like that, and you want to kind of support your if you want to support your decision making for your class breaks. That's always good to do. And I think because this is so much higher than the rest, I want to make this a slightly different hue to kind of highlight it. So I'm going to kind of slide the hue to kind of a magenta or even kind of just a purple. And if I do that and I say apply, it should, yeah, it did a good job there. See, it's kind of highlighting New York City, it's highlighting Chicago, and a little bit of kind of Los Angeles and some of the bigger cities. It kind of highlights them. So I'm kind of liking this now. The one thing I don't like, though, are the county boundaries. To me, they definitely seem very they're kind of in our face. So I'm going to go to select all of these here and go to my change with the symbol. And this is going to change the symbol for all of them. And I go to change symbol, and it says simple fill, but I know that I actually have a categorized type of symbology. But I can still go to the simple fill and shut off the solid line. And if I do that, so simple fill, kind of no pen on the border, I can go OK, and they just disappear, and I say apply, and then I get this kind of nice patterning on the land. So I think that looks good, and if you ever do that and you don't show the reporting units, you should make sure that you say something about it, because in this case it's not bad. The counties are all roughly the same size. There are a few really big ones, but we've normalized, and we've normalized by area. So hopefully the varying sizes of the counties has kind of been accounted for, more or less. And if it's not, then you need to make your audience kind of aware of that. But I'm pretty happy with this. There's one more thing I want to do to kind of ground this map, and that's create state boundaries. Now, I don't know if you remember what tool it is that we use to do that. I'm going to let you think about it for a second, and then I'll show you how to do it. So, did you guess it? Well, it's okay if you didn't. It's dissolve. We have in our attribute table a code for state, for each state. So this code tells us that these are independent states, 01, 02, all the way up to, well, up to 50, above 50, because we have territories and things like that. We have, we've got some different places in Puerto Rico and places like that. So, but if I dissolve by that state ID number, I should end up with a shapefile that is the outline of just the states. So this is the funny thing about dissolve, is before, when we did dissolve, it kind of just changed it. So when we selected it, they were all islands anyway, so we couldn't tell that there was any difference in geometry. But with this one, it's actually going to change the geometry. So I'm just going to show you here. I'm going to duplicate this layer. Okay, I've just been clicking around a bit, and I don't want you to be worried about it, but I just renamed a duplicate of this layer counties and gave it a single symbol with a border, so that when we do the dissolve, you'll kind of see the difference before and after. So go up here to vector under geoprocessing, and we're going to do a dissolve. And we dissolve counties by state code, and I'm going to call this new shapefile states, and it should work. I'm going to say OK. It might take a while to run. And it will, but I will see you on the other side. So if you have an older computer, that might have crashed it, but it did take quite a long time. And the reason for that, I hope you can see, is that when I toggle editing on this layer, the dissolve command has to go and pretty much, it's got to rewrite all of these geometries. So one way to kind of make the dissolve command work faster is to simplify these polygons. And you can do that with a tool under vector. It's called Simplified Geometries, and you can kind of do that. But I didn't do that. My computer worked. It took me probably 10 minutes or so to run the dissolve command. And what I have now are kind of states. And so the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make these states hollow so that I see the counties underneath them, but keep the boundary, so I see the state boundary. So to do that, I go to Properties, Simple Fill, and the fill color, I can just say no brush, fill style, no brush. I say apply, and there you have it. I think that looks pretty good. I say OK, and we're good to go. So that's the first map. The next videos are going to show you kind of how to make different styles of maps using the data that we've downloaded.